It was supposed to be just another foreclosure auction, a last-ditch gamble by a single mother named Eliza Brooks to give her children the life she'd always dreamed of. But when Eliza uncovered an antique safe buried beneath the floorboards of a crumbling farmhouse, everything changed. Inside wasn't just dust and relics. It was a hidden legacy, powerful enough to pit one determined woman against ruthless real estate developers hell-bent on bulldozing history. What she found sparked an epic showdown of small-town grit versus corporate greed, American tradition versus unchecked development. Hold on to your hats, gentlemen, because you're about to witness a dramatic battle for the soul of rural America. If you appreciate a true underdog story with surprising twists, forgotten treasures, and a healthy dose of old-fashioned American courage, subscribe now, settle in, and prepare to discover just how far one family will go to protect their heritage. Eliza Brooks had never planned on moving to the countryside as a single mother juggling waitressing shifts at the local diner in the small city of Riverton and trying to keep her two children, 14-year-old Jackson and 10-year-old Mia, happy, clothed, and safe. Her life felt more like treading water than moving forward. But when she first drove past the weathered auction sign perched on the edge of Riverside Acres, something about that old farmland caught her eye. The property, once a prominent apple orchard and homestead, had fallen on hard times. The red barn was missing half its roof. The farmhouse exterior paint was flaking in sheets, and the trees in the orchard, planted generations ago, were now overgrown, fighting for space among brambles. The land had changed hands multiple times and eventually ended up in foreclosure, yet for reasons Eliza couldn't fully articulate. At that moment, she felt drawn to it. The battered sign announcing an upcoming auction was like a beacon calling her to something different, something that might be more than just survival. She started making detours on her commute between her cramped two-bedroom apartment and Millie's diner, where she worked double shifts to pay the bills. Each time she passed, she parked along the roadside and walked the perimeter of the neglected orchard, imagining what it might look like if it were trimmed, pruned, and given new life. She'd been raised in a small town, and her grandfather had owned a modest orchard in the northern part of the state. Memories of that orchard, its fresh apples, the smell of cider pressing in the fall, the sense of peace that came from picking fruit and watching the seasons transform, resurfaced in her mind as she ambled through the tall grasses of Riverside Acres. Those recollections were bittersweet, touched by nostalgia for a childhood she could barely afford to let herself remember. Finances had been tough ever since her husband Caleb passed away from a sudden illness 6 years earlier. Medical bills ate into her meager savings, and after covering rent, groceries, and all the expenses that came with raising two children on her own, Eliza often found herself counting pennies by month's end. Yet she had managed to set aside a chunk of money from Caleb's life insurance, a fund she was fiercely protective of, intended originally for emergencies, or perhaps a future opportunity to buy a small home. With each visit to Riverside Acres, she started to wonder if this half-wild, struggling farm might be the new beginning she'd been craving for her family. Jackson was skeptical. At first, he was a pragmatic 14-year-old who worried about everything from mortgage payments to whether they could even grow an apple successfully without specialized training. Mia, on the other hand, was enchanted by the idea of living on a farm. She envisioned goats, chickens, rows of vegetables, and more space to run around than their tiny apartment had ever allowed. Eliza quietly listened to both of her children's perspectives, neither confirming nor denying her own. She simply said, "Let's see how the auction goes," holding on to a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, something extraordinary could come out of this. The morning of the auction arrived, with a chill wind blowing off the nearby river carrying the scent of autumn leaves. Eliza woke up earlier than usual, a knot in her stomach that mingled excitement with dread. She had no idea how many bidders would show up or what kind of money they'd be willing to throw down. For all she knew, Riverside Acres could be swept up by a large development firm or a local with deeper pockets. But she couldn't turn back. Something deep inside told her that she needed to be there to hold her bidder's number high and try, even if the odds were stacked against her. By the time Eliza and her children arrived at Riverside Acres, the gravel parking area and the dusty roadside were already lined with vehicles. The old farmhouse stood like a tired sentinel overlooking the land, its once white paint gray and peeling windows blank with curtains removed long ago. A portable speaker system crackled with the voice of the auctioneer, a portly man wearing a leather jacket and a battered cowboy hat who was setting up his equipment on the front steps. Workers pounded stakes into the ground, attaching signs that bore the words "Foreclosure Auction." The sound of hammer meeting earth reverberated through the brisk autumn air, lending the moment a certain finality. Jackson, as always, was first to speak. Mom, there are a lot of people here. Are you sure we have enough? His tone was respectful, but Eliza could hear the tremor beneath it. Mia looked up wide-eyed, hugging a thermos of hot chocolate against her chest. I don't want to go home without it, she whispered. The child's unfiltered confession made Eliza swallow hard. She forced a smile, pressing a hand on Mia's shoulder. We'll do our best, Eliza said, her voice steady. She had a maximum bid in mind, a delicate sum pulled from her life insurance stash, and a small personal loan approved by the local credit union. It wasn't much, certainly not what a fully operational orchard would cost, but this place needed so much work that the auction house had set the opening price low. Whether low would still be too high for her was a question she dreaded. Nerves fluttered in her stomach as she checked in at the registration table to receive her bidder's number. The volunteer asked to see her proof of funds, bank statements, pre-approval letters, then handed Eliza a bright orange paddle with the number 12 printed in bold black. She stared at it for a moment, thinking of how this small piece of plastic might be the key to a completely different life. Off to one side, a local news station had set up a camera, apparently drawn by the rumor that a small orchard was about to be either revitalized or destroyed, depending on who ended up buying it. Eliza tried not to think about how her face might end up on the evening broadcast describing her as the long-shot bidder. She spotted a group of people standing near an expensive SUV, all dressed in business casual attire. They were flipping through papers on clipboards, talking on Bluetooth headsets, clearly scoping out the property. Eliza's heart sank further. It looked suspiciously like the type of crew she'd heard rumors about a development company called Stonebridge Development, known for buying up rural properties, demolishing historic buildings, and erecting either tract homes or resort-like complexes. The tall man in the center with a crisp navy blazer and a calculating expression was definitely the one in charge. His name, she would soon learn, was Daniel Price, regional director for Stonebridge. Fighting a growing sense of pessimism, Eliza turned toward the orchard, taking in the orchard's rows, once well-tended, now a tangled forest of apple trees weighed down by old fruit. She let her fingertips run over the bark of the nearest trunk, feeling its roughness, and closed her eyes for just a second. She wanted to recall the warmth of her grandfather's orchard, the way it smelled of sweet apples and damp grass, the security she'd felt there as a child. She hoped her children might one day feel something similarly rooted. The auction commenced precisely at 10 o'clock, the auctioneer's voice booming through the speakers in a practiced patter. He introduced Riverside Acres, 120 acres of orchard farmland, and a historic farmhouse sold as is. He read a brief summary of the property's condition. Severe disrepair, requires extensive renovation. All existing liens cleared through foreclosure before announcing the starting bid, $85,000. Eliza felt her throat tighten. She'd expected the opening price to be around 80 or 90, but seeing that number officially on the block was different from imagining it in her head. She raised her paddle tentatively. I have 85 from number 12, the auctioneer rattled off, looking for 90. Immediately, Daniel Price's paddle shot up. 90, the auctioneer said, nodding in Price's direction. Do I hear 95? A wave of dread washed over Eliza. She raised her paddle again for 95, only for Price to respond with a smooth 100. Her mind spiraled. How high would Stonebridge be willing to go? The orchard was worthless to most commercial ventures, but the land itself, along with the possibility of future development, was prime. She pressed her lips together and lifted her paddle for 105, nearly all the while counting the limited cushion in her mind. When Price immediately countered with 110, a sick feeling curled in her gut. She was approaching her ceiling. 110, repeated the auctioneer. Do I have 115? The sound of wind rustling through the old apple trees played like a melody in the background. Eliza hesitated. Her children looked at her with mingled hope and fear. She lifted the paddle, 115 to number 12. The auctioneer cried, eyebrows arching in surprise. We have ourselves a contest, folks. Price didn't even blink. 120. He said, his voice calm. It was more than a statement. It felt like a warning, an indication that Stonebridge had deep pockets and intended to use them. Heart pounding, Eliza realized she was at her very limit. She could push maybe another 5,000 if she dug deeper into her emergency fund and prayed the renovations wouldn't bankrupt her. But even that seemed like a gamble. She risked everything for a property that might still crumble under her watch. Her paddle hovered in midair, her breath unsteady. 120 going once, the auctioneer intoned. Going twice, bomb. Before Eliza could form a coherent thought, another voice rang out, 125. The entire crowd pivoted to see who had spoken. A woman in her late 60s with cropped silver hair and a quietly confident posture raised her own paddle. She was dressed in practical boots, jeans, and a sturdy barn coat. Eliza had noticed her earlier, but hadn't pegged her for a competitor. The auctioneer blinked, then repeated, 125 from number 5. Do I hear 130? Eliza's sense of relief clashed with her confusion. Another bidder had saved her from having to make the impossible decision of exceeding her budget or walking away. But who was this woman, and why did she want the property so badly? Price scowled and signaled again 130. Without hesitation, the silver-haired bidder responded. 150, a collective gasp rose. That was a substantial jump, one that signaled serious intent. Price consulted someone on his phone, brow furrowing in frustration, but his next motion was decisive. He lowered his paddle. I'm out, he said curtly. 150 going once, going twice, said the auctioneer, scanning the group. When no one else dared to raise their paddles, he slammed the gavel down. Sold to Marisol Harding, bidder number 5 for $150,000. A tremor of disappointment and relief shook Eliza. She hadn't won, but also hadn't lost her life savings to a pointless bidding war. Still watching the silver-haired woman sign papers with the auction staff triggered a stab of regret. She'd imagined a future here, her children free from the dingy apartment farmland stretching out with possibilities. Now it felt as though that dream had slipped away in less than 10 minutes. That was quite the showdown, came a familiar voice from behind her. Eliza turned to see Linda, her coworker from Millie's Diner, hugging a jacket around her shoulders to ward off the breeze. I'm sorry it didn't go your way, hon. Linda was carrying a small basket with homemade muffins, but a bunch of us from the diner came out to support you. Eliza managed a small, grateful smile and introduced Linda to Jackson and Mia. Across the yard, Daniel Price was rallying his associates. Annoyance etched into his posture. They spoke in hushed tones, frustration evident. Eliza overheard just enough to discern that Stonebridge wouldn't give up on the broader region. They'd set their sights on multiple properties, including Riverside Acres. Her conversation with Linda was momentarily drowned out by Price's insistence that his company would find alternative means to secure the land they needed. Meanwhile, the newly minted owner of Riverside Acres, Marisol Harding, finished signing her purchase documents. Eliza decided she ought to approach and congratulate her. She braced herself, trying to swallow her lingering disappointment. After all, it was the polite thing to do. Ms. Harding, Eliza said as she neared. Congratulations on your purchase. I thought I'd introduce myself. I was one of the other bidders. My name is Eliza Brooks. Marisol turned and her face lit with a warm but discerning smile. Yes, of course, you were bidding up until you almost reached your limit. Am I right? Eliza chuckled wryly. That obvious, huh? Well, you certainly weren't as cavalier as Mr. Price over there, Marisol said, nodding toward the group of Stonebridge employees in the distance. I'm curious, Miss Brooks. Why did you want this property? The question was direct, but Marisol's tone was genuinely inquisitive, not intrusive. Eliza took a moment to form her answer. I had a personal connection to orchards through my grandfather. I thought maybe I could restore the trees here, bring them back to production, and eventually move my family onto the farm. We don't have a lot of financial freedom, but we do have a willingness to work hard. It seemed like a place that could become a real home. Marisol's gaze swept over Jackson and Mia, who were standing a few paces away, both trying to hide their disappointment. This place does need a lot of help, Marisol mused. A lot of TLC. I don't suppose you'd be interested in a cup of coffee at the diner sometime? I'd like to hear more about your plans. Hypothetical though they might be now. Linda interjected. Millie's Diner is where Eliza works, and where I work too. We'd be happy to have you as our guest. The coffee's on the house if you're coming in with Eliza. Marisol offered a gentle nod. That sounds lovely. I'll swing by tomorrow afternoon if that's convenient. Sure, said Eliza, somewhat astonished by the turn of events. She had expected never to see the new owner again, to simply watch from afar as Riverside Acres changed under someone else's direction. That Marisol wanted her input, or at least her story was baffling. As the auction staff began to pack up, Daniel Price caught Eliza's eye for a moment. A flash of curiosity, maybe even respect, crossed his face. But it vanished in an instant, replaced by the dismissive irritation of someone whose plans had just been thwarted. He turned away, talking on his phone, presumably strategizing the next move for Stonebridge. Eliza felt emotionally spent. She called Jackson and Mia over, and together they headed back to their aging sedan. One by one, they tossed in their winter coats and the half-empty thermos Mia still clutched. The drive back to Riverton was subdued, punctuated only by Mia's occasional sighs and Jackson's stony silence. But in the rearview mirror, Eliza caught her own expression, a mixture of exhaustion and curiosity about what might come next. The next day, the bell above the door of Millie's diner tinkled, announcing Marisol Harding's entrance. Eliza stood behind the counter in her usual spot, wearing an apron that had seen better days. Despite the lines of fatigue on her, as from the previous day's emotional roller coaster, she greeted Marisol with a heartfelt smile. Marisol glanced around the diner, taking in its retro booths, the chalkboard menu proclaiming daily specials, and the morning regulars sipping coffee. She settled onto a stool at the counter. "Good afternoon," she said, returning Eliza's smile. "Linda told me the coffee here is the best in Greystone County, so I had to see for myself." Eliza poured her a steaming mug, then leaned against the counter. "I'm still a bit confused as to why you'd want to talk to me," she admitted. "I don't exactly have a lot of influence around here." "I don't need influence," Marisol answered calmly, stirring a bit of cream into her coffee. "I need someone who cares about that orchard. Someone with a vision that goes beyond seeing property as just an investment or a burdensome mortgage. I think you might be that someone." Eliza frowned slightly. "I'm not following," Marisol set her spoon down delicately as though deliberating how much to reveal. "I've spent much of my career acquiring rural properties that are labeled distressed, and I bring them back to viability often, with a focus on preserving their agricultural or historic value. Sometimes I sell them to families who will continue the work. Other times I retain ownership and lease the land to farmers with a commitment to sustainability. My organization is called the Harding Rural Revival Trust." The name sounded vaguely familiar. Eliza recalled reading a headline about a wealthy philanthropist who had saved several small dairy farms up north from being sold to a conglomerate. "So Riverside Acres is your next project," Eliza deduced. "Precisely," Marisol said with a small nod. "However, I'm not getting any younger, and these projects take a lot of energy and a personal touch. That's where you come in. I remember how you spoke about your grandfather's orchard, and I noticed the determination in your eyes at the auction. You wanted that land for more than just living space. You saw the orchard as something with potential, and that's what I look for in a partner, Eliza asked, nearly dropping the coffee pot. Marisol nodded. "A partner, yes. I propose a 50-50 arrangement legally structured so that my trust retains ownership of the land, while you and your family live there and manage its restoration. We'd share the business revenue, orchard sales potential, agritourism, or any future endeavors until such a time as you can buy me out if you wish. The trust would fund the initial renovations, equipment, and improvements needed to get things running. In return, you'd commit to following sustainable practices and thoroughly documenting the restoration process." Eliza stared speechless. It was like a dream scenario, dropped into her lap. But with dreams often come stipulations. "That's extremely generous," she managed, "but why me?" Marisol's expression softened. "Because you already took the first step by believing in that farm, when practically no one else did. You were willing to risk your savings to fight for it against a company that has deep pockets and zero regard for preserving history. We need that kind of passion, especially now that Stonebridge is expanding. Daniel Price's intentions for the entire region worry me. He's been buying and flipping properties so quickly, entire farming communities have been replaced by subdevelopments that don't honor the land's legacy." The diner's lunch crowd began drifting in, prompting Eliza to pause the conversation to take orders. But Marisol patiently sipped her coffee as if unbothered by the bustle. Eliza's mind buzzed with questions about the specifics of the partnership, legal intricacies, how it would affect Jackson and Mia, and whether she was truly capable of reviving an orchard on a large scale. Despite the uncertainties, she couldn't deny the spark of hope flaring inside her. Marisol stayed until the diner's rush quieted down, patiently reading a newspaper, while Eliza served burgers, fries, and thick milkshakes to regulars. When the last plate was cleared and only a couple of customers remained, Marisol beckoned Eliza over to one of the booths and opened a slim leather briefcase. Inside were neatly typed documents, outlines, and a draft proposal. "This is not an immediate decision," Marisol said, offering Eliza a packet that summarized the arrangement. "But I want you to have the details in writing. We'd form a limited liability corporation that would manage the farm operations with me as an investor and you as the manager. If the orchard becomes profitable, you'll receive a salary plus a share of the earnings. In time, the trust could sell you the property at a fair rate, which we'd calculate based on an updated appraisal. There's also a living stipend to cover basics while you get started, so you won't need to keep working here full-time, unless you want to. Eliza's hand shook slightly as she skimmed the text. It was a formal agreement. No illusions of charity or trivial help, but it was generous in scope. It recognized the realities of a single mother with limited capital. She could feel her heart thud faster, both in excitement and terror. "What if I fail?" she asked softly. "What if the farm doesn't become profitable? What if I can't balance orchard management, raising 2 kids, and all the other challenges that come with resurrecting neglected land?" Marisol gave a reassuring smile. "Then we adapt. We look at alternate revenue streams, or we bring in outside experts. The trust provides a safety net, but it also requires that you truly invest yourself, your time, your care into this project. Failure is always a possibility, but so is success. And from what I've witnessed, you have the determination to succeed if given the right tools." Before Eliza could form another question, Mia and Jackson burst into the diner. They had taken the school bus, which dropped them off a few blocks away, and came bounding in with backpacks, bouncing. Mia's cheeks were flushed from running, while Jackson maintained a more controlled stride. "This is my daughter, Mia, and my son, Jackson." Eliza introduced, smoothing Mia's hair. Both kids glanced from their mother to Marisol, curiosity plain on their faces. Marisol extended a polite nod. "Nice to meet you both. I've been talking to your mother about the farm I just purchased, Riverside Acres." The mention of the farm made Mia light up instantly. "The place from the auction. Mom really wanted to get it." She trailed off, looking slightly forlorn. "That's right," Marisol said kindly, "and in fact, she still might. I've asked your mom to consider running the orchard under a special arrangement. It's going to take a lot of hard work. Think the two of you are up for it?" Jackson exchanged a glance with Mia. In his eyes, Eliza could see a flicker of the same cautious optimism she felt. "Really?" he asked. "We'd get to live on a farm. That's the idea," Marisol confirmed. "The cottage on the property needs some immediate repairs, but it's structurally sound. You could move in within a few weeks if you decide to take me up on the offer." Mia practically squealed, while Jackson broke into a grin that looked as if it had been waiting a long time to appear. Watching them, Eliza realized how much this opportunity mattered to her children. Maybe it was more than just nostalgia or a whimsical dream. Maybe it was an actual shot at a better life. That evening, Eliza spread the paperwork across the kitchen table in their cramped apartment, the yellowish overhead light casting shadows on the text. Jackson made mac and cheese for Mia. In the background, an arrangement that had become common. He was old enough to handle simple cooking duties, helping out since Eliza often got home late from the diner. She flipped through the clauses about land maintenance requirements, the trust's responsibilities in underwriting initial renovation costs, and the stipulations about sustainable farming methods. It was a labyrinth of legal language, but the gist seemed to be that Marisol was offering an almost too-perfect safety net to restore Riverside Acres. Jackson and Mia joined her at the table, curiosity pushing aside the half-eaten mac and cheese. Mia studied the diagrams of the property layout, pointing at the orchard's map. "Where do you think we'll put goats and chickens?" she asked, eyes gleaming. Eliza laughed softly. "We might need to see if that's allowed in the plan, but I'm sure we can figure out something. First, we have to worry about pruning all those apple trees." Jackson's fingers traced the text about orchard renovation grants. "It says here the trust will also pay for orchard management consultants. Isn't that exactly what you were worried about, Mom? Not having enough experience?" Eliza nodded. "Yes, it's exactly what I was worried about." She glanced toward the window where the city lights glowed in the distance, a far cry from the starlit vistas she imagined they'd have in the countryside. "I've been on my own since your dad passed, doing everything I could just to keep us stable. This feels like jumping into the deep end again. But maybe we need that. Maybe we need a big change to find our footing." The next few days were a blur of phone calls, visits to the local extension office, and late-night reading of orchard management books. Eliza was stunned to discover how many people in Greystone County were aware of Riverside Acres. Some even had fond memories of picking apples there when they were kids, back when the orchard thrived under its former owners. Through these conversations, she learned that the orchard had once been known for an old-fashioned apple variety, rumored to have come from seeds dating back to the original homesteaders. This piqued Eliza's interest. Maybe that heritage could be leveraged if she could nurse those trees back to life. During one meeting with a county official, she learned that Stonebridge Development had already acquired neighboring parcels. There was talk of them wanting to buy as many foreclosed farms as possible to assemble a larger piece of land for a major project. The official hinted that Daniel Price was not the type to accept defeat easily, and that Marisol's purchase of Riverside Acres likely ruffled more than a few feathers. Yet the more Eliza learned, the more she felt that stepping into this uncertain journey might be the right move. She began to draft an email to Marisol accepting the offer but paused before sending. She reread every paragraph of the partnership agreement. She wouldn't have full ownership from the start. It was more like being a tenant farmer with an option to buy in the future. But it gave her a level of security she'd never imagined possible. No monstrous mortgage, no immediate risk of being swallowed by debt. She'd have to hustle to make it profitable, but at least she wouldn't be completely alone. Taking a deep breath, she clicked send. A week later, Eliza found herself standing on the sagging porch of the caretaker's cottage at Riverside Acres, Marisol. True to her word, had already hired a small crew to handle urgent structural repairs, patching the roof, fixing the plumbing, and replacing shattered windows. While it remained far from luxurious, it was at least weather-tight and livable. Boxes of the family's belongings were scattered across the cottage's living room floor, and Mia was already decorating one wall with her handmade drawings of farm animals and fruit trees. Jackson methodically unpacked the kitchen, placing cups and plates into worn cabinets that would eventually need replacement. Eliza directed movers to bring a used sofa, a coffee table, and the few pieces of furniture they had. It felt surreal. After only a few weeks, they were actually moving onto the property Eliza thought she'd lost at auction. She kept expecting to wake from a dream and find herself back in their apartment, hustling to get to the diner before the breakfast rush. Instead, a crisp breeze drifted through the orchard, carrying a faint hint of apples and decaying leaves, reminding her that autumn was still lingering. Hank Wheeler, an older man in his 70s who'd worked on the orchard years ago, knocked on the open doorway. He wore sturdy boots and a flannel shirt. His posture stooped but full of energy. In his eyes heard, "We've got ourselves a new orchard manager," he said, tipping a worn baseball cap in greeting. "Name's Hank. I used to maintain the irrigation around here back when the orchard was open to the public." Eliza smiled warmly, wiping sweat from her brow. "Nice to meet you, Hank. I could sure use some expert guidance. The orchard looks pretty overwhelming." Hank stepped inside, glancing around the cottage, as if revisiting an old friend. "I'd be happy to help, if Miss Harding agrees. I've been living nearby with my daughter, but I come by occasionally just to keep an eye on the place," he chuckled softly. "Folks in town say Riverside Acres is haunted by the memories of better days. I'd like to see it come back, though. It was beautiful in its prime." Eliza walked with Hank to the orchard, trudging through ankle-high grass. Branches clung to shriveled apples that had never been harvested, and some trees were choked by climbing vines. "I'm worried most of these trees are beyond saving," she admitted. Hank knelt down to inspect the soil, crumbling it in his hands. "The roots might still be good," he mused. "We'll cut away the deadwood, see which trees show signs of life come spring. Some might be too far gone, but there's a good chance quite a few can bounce back if we treat them right." Hope stirred in Eliza. She could already imagine lines of trees pruned and neatly spaced with baskets of apples waiting to be pressed into cider or sold at local farmers markets. Yet she knew it would be a journey, one requiring months, if not years, of sweat planning and worry. By evening, the cottage was livable, albeit cluttered. They dined on simple sandwiches, seated on mismatched chairs around a makeshift table, composed of an old door laid across two sawhorses. Mia kept gushing about how the orchard would look when it was magical and full of fairies, while Jackson expressed excitement about possibly learning to use farm equipment. In that humble moment, cramped among boxes and the faint glow of a single light fixture, Eliza felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: belonging. The next morning, Eliza woke before sunrise to the unfamiliar silence of rural life. She had grown so accustomed to the sounds of traffic sirens and her neighbor's TV blaring at odd hours that the quiet was almost unnerving. Pulling on a jacket and stepping outside, she inhaled deeply. The orchard stretched out in the early light, dew glinting on the grass and a light mist hovering near the edges. Despite the chill, she found it oddly comforting. She was startled to see headlights approaching up the gravel driveway. It was Marisol's truck. The older woman stepped out, holding a rolled-up set of documents under one arm and a container of coffee in the other. "Good morning," she called, offering the coffee to Eliza. "I thought you might appreciate a little caffeine." "I never say no to coffee," Eliza said gratefully, taking a sip that warmed her right down to her toes. "What's in the paperwork?" Marisol unrolled the documents, carefully revealing old blueprints and a map of the property county archives. I've got the original layout of the orchard from nearly a century ago. Apparently, the orchard's founder, a man named Cornelius Rivers, kept detailed notes on irrigation grafting, experiments, and storage cellars. Some say he installed a small safe in the basement of the old farmhouse, but it was never found during previous ownership changes. Eliza raised an eyebrow. A safe, like a hidden treasure kind of thing. Marisol chuckled. Treasure, maybe? Or maybe it's just a few musty ledgers, but it's worth investigating. If there are old records or something historically significant, it could add to the orchard's narrative and thus its future marketing potential. The idea of a hidden safe piqued Eliza's curiosity. She couldn't help but recall stories of her own grandfather's orchard, how he'd once hidden money in mason jars under fence posts after losing faith in local banks. It was a different era. But maybe Cornelius Rivers had been similarly cautious or forward-thinking. Let's check it out, Eliza agreed. I'll get a flashlight. The farmhouse doesn't have power yet, does it? Marisol shook her head. Not until we get an electrician out there, but I did bring a couple of lanterns. They trudged through the yard, stepping over fallen branches and patches of weeds that had reclaimed most of the space. The farmhouse loomed ahead, paint peeling around old window frames that stared like sunken eyes. The front porch creaked ominously under their combined weight, and inside the stale scent of mold and abandonment enveloped them. Rusty nails jutted from old floorboards, and half the staircase rail was missing. But beneath the decay, Eliza could glimpse the bones of what once was a charming home. High ceilings, handcrafted trim. Someone had poured love into this place. Following the faint light from their lanterns, they made their way to the cellar door. The hinges groaned in protest as Marisol pried it open, revealing wooden steps that disappeared into darkness. A chill draft wafted up, carrying an earthy smell. They descended slowly, their beams illuminating crumbling stone walls. At first glance, the cellar appeared to store only broken furniture and scattered debris. But along the far wall, behind a tangle of spiderwebs, they noticed a rectangular outline in the mortar, a section that looked subtly different from the rest. With a thrill of anticipation, Eliza edged closer, wondering if the stories were true, and if so, whether it might hold anything that could change the course of Riverside Acres forever. The small, rectangular outline on the cellar wall drew Eliza and Marisol's full attention. Using the back of a hammer, Marisol tapped lightly around the edges. The hollow echo on one side convinced them that there was indeed some sort of compartment behind the stone. Eliza's heart thudded faster, despite all logic telling her that anything hidden here would likely be dusty papers or worthless trinkets. She couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. Together, they cleared away debris and carefully pried at the mortar. It was old and brittle. Large chunks crumbled under the pressure of a metal pry bar, sending bits of stone and dust cascading onto the cellar floor. Their lanterns cast wavering light, making each shadow jump and skitter like a ghost. After several minutes of effort, they uncovered a cast-iron panel with a rusted latch. Eliza tugged, but it refused to budge. Marisol produced a small bottle of penetrating oil from her jacket pocket. She'd come prepared, apparently. She applied the oil to the latch and hinge, waiting for it to soak in. When the latch finally gave way with a creak, the panel swung open to reveal a small iron safe behind it, about the size of a large bread box. Its surface was tarnished and pocked with rust, but an ornate design and the name Rivers & Co. could still be faintly discerned. The combination dial was frozen, but a metal handle jutted out below it. "Moment of truth," Eliza whispered. She tried the handle, but it wouldn't move. "We might need a locksmith." Marisol nodded. "Before we do any damage, let's see if we can find a combination in the old records. It's possible Cornelius Rivers or his family left some clue." Climbing back up into the light, they rummaged through the farmhouse in search of documents, diaries, or anything that could hold a numeric clue. Most of the upstairs rooms were gutted with holes in the walls, revealing lath and plaster. An attic door stuck partially open revealed trunks filled with mildewed blankets and a few water-damaged books, none of which mentioned any combination. Despite the fruitless search, neither woman was disappointed. The mere discovery of the safe was enough to spark new conversations about the farm's history and potential. They spent the rest of the morning clearing more debris from the farmhouse, propping open windows to let fresh air circulate. Hank stopped by, poking his head in and chuckling at their enthusiasm. "Told you this old place had secrets," he said with a wink. By lunchtime, Eliza and Marisol had filled 2 trash bags with junk and dust, coated their clothes and hair. They retreated to the caretaker's cottage where Mia and Jackson had prepared sandwiches. The kids hung on every word about the hidden safe, their imaginations alight with treasure hunts and old-time mysteries. Could it have gold coins? Mia asked breathlessly. Or a secret message, Jackson smirked. It's probably just old ledgers or a bunch of receipts. Eliza tousled his hair. You never know until we get it open, she said. The practical side of her suspected that Jackson was right. This was probably more historical curiosity than anything that would solve their financial challenges. But a small part of her let hope linger. After all, if she had learned anything so far, it was that Riverside Acres was filled with surprises. Over the following week, Eliza doubled down on orchard tasks. She had to balance her last shifts at the diner she'd given her notice, but was helping train her replacement and her responsibilities at Riverside Acres. Since the trust provided a modest living stipend, she no longer had to rely solely on tips to survive. Though she did miss the camaraderie of her regular customers, Hank proved invaluable. He guided Eliza on how to identify which apple trees might still be viable, marking them with strips of brightly colored tape. He demonstrated pruning techniques on the younger, healthier trees. Each time they uncovered a patch of orchard that seemed salvageable, Eliza's confidence grew. The orchard's neat grid-like layout suggested a once thriving operation, and even though the branches were gnarly and tangled, she saw the underlying structure. Marisol dropped by regularly, discussing everything from business plans to marketing strategies. You'll want to decide which varieties of apples are most profitable, she explained one afternoon. Heritage apples can fetch a good price at farmers markets, especially with the orchard's backstory. People love authenticity. They'll pay for something they can't find at the supermarket. Eliza nodded. She'd begun a notebook of ideas for the orchard, which sections might be best for pick-your-own experiences, which could be converted to a future cider press, and how they might partner with local schools for educational tours. It was a whirlwind of possibilities she'd never imagined a few months ago. Meanwhile, a locksmith named Henry Tate arrived to assess the safe in the farmhouse cellar. He spent hours trying to manipulate the combination dial, but it was too rusted. Eventually, he declared he'd need more specialized tools to open it without destroying the entire thing. I've worked on some antiques, Henry said, wiping sweat from his brow, but this one is particularly stubborn. Could be we'll have to drill in a strategic spot, then repair the mechanism after Marisol agreed to the plan, wanting to preserve the safe as a historical artifact rather than simply forcing it open with brute strength. She also contacted a local historian who showed great interest in any documents that might be inside, especially if they related to Cornelius Rivers or the orchard's early days. All the while, Daniel Price and Stonebridge development hadn't been idle. Rumors reached Eliza's ears through Linda, through county workers, through a real estate agent she ran into that Stonebridge was aggressively buying up neighboring farmland. The plan apparently was to develop a massive residential community, complete with a golf course and a shopping center. Part of the orchard's historical charm would be overshadowed by the traffic and noise if Stonebridge got what they wanted. Late one evening, when the sun had dipped behind the orchard and the cottage's windows glowed softly, Eliza found a letter in her mailbox. The Stonebridge logo was printed on the envelope. Inside, she discovered a short note from Daniel Price, Mrs. Brooks. We'd like to speak with you about the future of Riverside Acres. Our company remains interested in ensuring that progress and heritage can coexist. We believe a partnership could be mutually beneficial. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. Eliza's hand tightened on the paper. She recognized the corporate politeness that masked Stonebridge's real aim to purchase or control her land. A chill ran through her as she imagined them flattening the orchard for yet another cookie-cutter subdivision. She hurried inside, determined to share the letter with Marisol. Marisol read the letter by the flickering light of the cottage's overhead bulb. She frowned, the corners of her eyes crinkling in a way that betrayed her concern. He's probing, she stated bluntly. Stonebridge has done this before. They'll offer some seemingly fair or even lavish deal, expecting you to capitulate because it's easier to take the money than to face uncertainty. Eliza sank into the worn living room chair. Exhaustion etched into her posture. I can't believe how relentless they are. They didn't get the farm at auction, so they think they can just pry it away later. That's exactly what they think, Marisol replied. They're collecting parcels all around us. If they surround us, it's going to be harder for Riverside Acres to remain purely agricultural. We'd have to worry about increased traffic noise, possibly water rights. They'll do what they can to make us uncomfortable. A low dread settled in Eliza's stomach. Is there any legal recourse we can take? Some zoning protection? Marisol's expression brightened slightly. Yes, but it'll be a process. I'm already working on it with my legal team. We'll push for farmland preservation status and historical site recognition, especially if there's something historically significant in that safe. Meanwhile, you focus on making this orchard more visible to the community. If we garner local support, it'll be politically risky for Stonebridge to bulldoze over public sentiment. They decided to respond to Price's letter, not with a refusal, but with a polite decline of further discussion. It was better to keep communications civil and maintain the moral high ground if a public relations battle ensued. Over the next few days, Eliza and Marisol rolled out a plan to build goodwill in the region. They invited local schools to do small field trips, even though the orchard was still half wild. Hank set up demonstration pruning sessions, and local families showed surprising interest. One Saturday, a few volunteers showed up to help clear brush and remove rotting apples from the bases of the trees. In the midst of this flurry of activity, the locksmith, Henry Tate, returned with specialized drills and picks. With Hank, Marisol, and Eliza looking on, Henry carefully bored a small hole near the lock mechanism, then inserted a scope-like tool. He fiddled for what felt like an eternity before an audible click reverberated through the cellar. Slowly, Henry pulled the safe's handle. The door creaked open, revealing a shadowed interior. There was no immediate flash of gold coins or glimmering jewels, just a stack of leather-bound ledgers, a few brittle-looking envelopes, and a small wooden box about the size of a jewelry container. Eliza's shoulders slumped slightly, half relieved and half disappointed. "Well," she said, "not the pirate's treasure we secretly dreamed of." Marisol caught her eye. "Knowledge can be treasure too," she reminded gently. Henry extracted the items with careful hands, setting them in a box. Hank had ready. Dust motes danced in the lantern's beam as they moved the contents upstairs, finding a cleaner spot to examine them. Eliza held her breath as she lifted one of the ledgers. The first page, written in elegant cursive, bore the name Cornelius Rivers and a date from the late 1800s. If these books contained orchard records, that alone might be invaluable. The group gathered around the caretaker's cottage dining table. Eliza carefully flipped open the first ledger, scanning the antique handwriting that ranged from incomprehensible scribbles to meticulous accounts of bushels harvested. "Looks like these detail the orchard's production," she said, pointing to a column labeled "Apples Sold at Goes Year by Year," listing varieties I've never even heard of. Black Calville, Snow White Pippin, Hastings Gold. Hank peered over her shoulder. Some of those might be heirloom varieties that aren't common anymore. Farmers often experimented, and some lines just disappeared if they weren't commercially viable. Marisol smiled. "But if they still exist in this orchard, you could have something unique on your hands. Heritage apple varieties can be a big selling point. Some companies pay a premium for authentic rare stock." Henry Tate, the locksmith, gingerly opened one of the envelopes. "Oh, wow," he breathed. "This looks like a set of personal letters from Cornelius to a family member. They mention a new safe and some concerns about bank failures, typical of the era." He added, glancing around at the others, "Banks went under frequently back then." Meanwhile, Eliza slowly pried open the small wooden box. Its hinges were stiff, but it finally yielded, revealing a few items nestled in faded velvet cloth, a tarnished pocket watch, a ring with a missing stone, and a folded piece of parchment. Opening the parchment, she found a scrawled message: "To whomever holds this orchard's future. These tokens are but trifles compared to the land's true bounty. If fate leads you to these records, preserve what you can, that your harvests shall endure. The orchard is more than trees. It's a promise between the living and the land." The note sent a shiver down Eliza's spine. She imagined a much younger Cornelius Rivers placing these items in the safe, hoping that someone in a distant century would find them and continue his work. The relics felt like a blessing, a whispered encouragement from a man long gone. Marisol gently folded the note. "This is amazing," she said softly. "Not in terms of monetary value, but historically and symbolically, it's a treasure. We can showcase these items along with the orchard's history to the community. It might help bolster our case for historical and agricultural preservation." They spent the next few hours cataloging the items and snapping photos. Marisol called the local historical society, inviting them to come and review the ledgers. The society's director was thrilled and promised to stop by within a week. When Henry left and Hank drifted back to his trailer, Eliza and Marisol sat at the table, both sipping on mugs of tea as evening fell. The orchard's potential felt more tangible than ever. The discovery in the safe was a reminder that Riverside Acres wasn't just about turning a profit. It was about continuing a legacy that had begun long before they were born. "So what's the next step?" Eliza asked. Setting her mug down, "I'd like to bring in Dr. Helene Orr from the State University. She's a pomologist, a specialist in fruit tree genetics," Marisol explained. "If some of these ledger notations refer to apple strains that are extinct or extremely rare, we might have a real gem here. Orr can test the trees for unique genetics." Eliza nodded, overwhelmed yet excited. She thought about her children, about how their lives had already shifted in the short time they had been at the farm, and about what it would mean if Riverside Acres became known for reviving lost apple varieties. The orchard's new chapter was just beginning, and she felt certain that Cornelius Rivers's hopes and dreams were unfolding right alongside her own. Word of the hidden safe and its intriguing contents traveled faster than Eliza anticipated. A local newspaper ran a story featuring a photograph of her holding one of the ledgers in front of the dilapidated farmhouse. The headline read, "Century-Old Orchard, Secrets Uncovered, a glimpse into Greystone County's past." The following day, curious visitors began driving by the property, slowing down to see if they could catch a glimpse of any further treasure hunting action. Eliza didn't mind the attention, but it made her realize that the orchard's revival was increasingly under the spotlight. Marisol was quick to leverage the interest, issuing a press release about the Harding Rural Revival Trust's mission to preserve historically significant agricultural lands. She also scheduled a public open house for the following month, promising guided tours to showcase the orchard's progress. Hank, who had begun meticulously pruning the healthier trees, was both amused and slightly flustered by the idea of giving tours while the orchard was still in disarray. "We'll show him some stumps and some hope," he joked. Meanwhile, Dr. Helene Orr arrived one crisp morning, stepping out of her van with scientific instruments in hand and a small team of graduate students trailing behind her. She was a tall woman with short-cropped hair, exuding an air of no-nonsense expertise. After brief introductions, she set to work collecting leaf samples, measuring trunk diameters, and photographing the orchard's layout. "It'll take some time for the lab work," she explained, jotting notes on a tablet, "but if any of these trees are genetically distinct, it could mean you're sitting on a horticultural gold mine." Eliza found herself feeling both excited and nervous. Revitalizing the orchard was challenge enough. Discovering they had rare or extinct varieties could bring a flood of new opportunities and complications. Marisol assured her it was better to know than not, as it could further justify farmland protection. That same week, Daniel Price made another subtle move, and an invitation arrived for Eliza, addressed personally, requesting she attend a networking dinner organized by Stonebridge Development at a local hotel conference room. The invite boasted about fostering collaboration between new and existing landowners for a brighter economic future. Though it rankled her, Eliza decided to go. "Better to know what they're up to," Marisol agreed. On a Friday evening, Eliza dressed in her one good blazer and drove to the hotel. Inside the conference hall, she found an array of business people mingling around high-top tables and sipping complimentary wine. Elaborate posters displayed Stonebridge's planned development, sprawling neighborhoods with manicured lawns, commercial zones with glossy storefronts, and even a man-made lake. She soon spotted Daniel Price himself in conversation with a small group. When he noticed her, he excused himself and approached Miss Brooks. He greeted her with a polite smile. "I'm pleased you could make it. Please help yourself to some refreshments. I hope you'll find our vision here inspiring." Eliza forced a civil smile. "I appreciate the invitation. I'm curious to learn more about how your plans might impact the farms around Riverside Acres." Price ushered her toward a scale model complete with tiny plastic houses and trees. "We see an opportunity for synergy," he said. "Your orchard could become a sort of rustic attraction to pair with our upscale retail and residential offerings. Imagine a family picking apples in the morning, then dining at a fashionable restaurant in the evening." Eliza felt her stomach twist. Stonebridge's idea of synergy sounded more like the orchard becoming a sideshow in a slick real estate package. "I worry about the orchard's water usage, traffic, and the integrity of farmland once you surround it with houses." Price's smile didn't waver. "All addressed in our environmental impact studies, I assure you. Our developments actually upgrade local infrastructure, and we're open to discussing how Riverside Acres could integrate with the new community. Perhaps a partnership or even an acquisition." A cool flush rippled through Eliza. She'd known he might broach the topic, but hearing it so casually was unnerving. "Riverside Acres isn't for sale, Mr. Price," she said, her tone calm but firm. Everything has a price, he countered smoothly. No pun intended, if not now, then perhaps in the future. We'll be around if you change your mind. Eliza left the event earlier than planned, her frustration mingling with an uncomfortable sense that Stonebridge's creeping presence was not going away. She returned to the cottage where Jackson and Mia were waiting, finishing their homework under the glow of a table lamp. Marisol was there too, having volunteered to babysit. They listened intently as Eliza recounted the development proposals, the slick models, and Daniel Price's unrelenting confidence. I can't stand how they treat the orchard like a mere bullet point in a brochure, Eliza fumed. It's as if years of farmers' sweat, the orchard's history, and our own future plans don't matter beyond how quaint it looks for potential homebuyers. Marisol nodded sympathetically. That's exactly what Stonebridge does. They target areas with a potential rural charm, purchase large swaths of land, and incorporate just enough green space to market it as a bucolic paradise while completely erasing the agricultural heritage that once existed. Jackson listened quietly, then asked, "Can they force us to sell?" His voice carried a teenager's bravado, but also a hint of fear. Eliza shook her head. "No, not unless there's some form of eminent domain, which I doubt, but they can make life difficult. If they own all the neighboring parcels, they might push for rezoning or find ways to limit our access to water rights." Marisol laid out a map on the table pointing to the parcels Stonebridge had already acquired. "It's not just about one orchard," she explained. "They want to dominate the entire region, but we do have options. I've reached out to other small farms around here, hoping to establish a cooperative or a farmland preservation network. If enough landowners band together, we could create an agricultural district that would be costly and time-consuming for Stonebridge to fight Eliza's side." Appreciating the scope of Marisol's strategy, she turned to Jackson and Mia, who were looking worried. "I don't want you two to panic. We're not moving again. Stonebridge can't just kick us out." Mia, clutching a drawing she'd made of apple trees, asked, "What can we do to help?" Eliza paused, touched by her daughter's eagerness. "Well, for now, keep drawing pictures of our orchard. Talk to your friends. Spread the word that Riverside Acres is special. Every bit of community support helps." That weekend, they hosted their first Orchard Volunteer Day. Dozens of people showed up, some out of curiosity, others wanting to support farmland preservation, and a few just seeking an excuse to spend time outdoors. Mia proudly led small groups around the orchard, explaining which trees were the ancient ones, while Jackson helped Hank demonstrate pruning and mulching techniques. Eliza gave mini tours of the farmhouse, pointing to the cellar door, where they discovered the safe. At the end of the day, the group gathered around a bonfire near the caretaker's cottage, roasting marshmallows. Many of the visitors commented on how they hadn't realized what a hidden gem Riverside Acres was tucked away behind unkempt fields and old rumors. Looking around, Eliza felt a surge of gratitude. The orchard was already forming its own network of supporters, ordinary people who believed in the land's worth beyond a development company's ledger. In the following weeks, life at Riverside Acres found a new rhythm. The orchard team, Eliza, Hank, and a handful of part-time helpers focused on rehabilitating as many trees as possible before winter set in. They removed dead branches and cleared ground cover, discovering that many of the older varieties showed surprising resilience once given proper attention. Orr's initial findings arrived via email, an excited note that referenced at least 3 genetic strains not fully cataloged in modern databases. "If further testing confirms these as lost or near-lost varieties," she wrote, "your orchard might hold material that researchers, cider makers, and heritage fruit enthusiasts will clamor for." The potential income from licensing these unique apple strains wasn't lost on Eliza, who was constantly aware of the orchard's financial realities. Outside their farm bubble, Stonebridge's influence continued to expand. Daniel Price secured rezoning approvals for a neighboring parcel rumored to become a gated community. Earth-moving equipment rumbled across the once quiet fields, reshaping the land. Occasionally, Eliza would stand by the orchard's fence line, watching bulldozers push aside topsoil that once supported agriculture, feeling a melancholy mix of anger and sadness. But there was also progress on the orchard side. Marisol's efforts to form a cooperative among local farmers were paying off. 3 small-scale dairy operations joined along with a vineyard whose owner feared Stonebridge would snatch up land for recreational amenities. With Marisol's trust providing a legal framework, they began drafting a formal proposal for Greystone County to designate a historical agricultural zone. If approved, it would protect certain types of farm operations from overbearing development pressures. Part of their case rested on Riverside Acres' historical and ecological significance. Bolstered by Dr. Orr's research, Eliza dedicated hours to writing a testimonial, weaving the orchard's story with references to the discovered safe, Cornelius Rivers' records, and the orchard's impact on the local community. She included anecdotal accounts from volunteers who had rediscovered their love of nature while helping out. The local press maintained interest running stories on the orchard's volunteer days. Dr. Orr's genetic discoveries and the formation of the cooperative. This positive coverage contrasted sharply with the uneasy sentiment building around Stonebridge's large-scale plans. At town hall meetings, residents questioned whether the new developments would strain the water table or worsen traffic. Eventually, Daniel Price formally requested a meeting with Marisol and Eliza. It might be prudent to accept to at least hear him out. Marisol suggested refusing could imply we're not willing to communicate, but I'd like to attend as your partner and advisor. They agreed to meet at a local cafe, choosing neutral ground. Price arrived with a younger associate, both in tailored suits that contrasted sharply with Eliza's jeans and work boots. The conversation was civil at first. Price expressed admiration for the orchard's historical value, claiming Stonebridge wanted to incorporate that legacy into their overall vision for the county. Marisol remained composed, pointing out that Stonebridge's developments thus far had done little to preserve farmland. Price deflected, citing new parks and greenbelts. But when the conversation shifted to a direct offer, Stonebridge was willing to purchase a 60% stake in Riverside Acres for well above its assessed value. Eliza felt her temper flare. She took a breath, recalling Marisol's advice to keep calm. "No, thank you," Eliza said. "We're committed to restoring the orchard's agricultural purpose, not turning it into a corporate showpiece." Price's associate tried to play good cop, suggesting a compromise in which the orchard could host Stonebridge-branded events. But when Eliza again refused, Price's veneer of politeness cracked. "Don't be foolish," he warned quietly. "Stonebridge doesn't lose. Eventually you'll realize you need our backing." After that tense cafe meeting, autumn progressed into winter and Riverside Acres settled into a waiting phase. Hank explained that proper orchard management required letting the trees go dormant. By now, the orchard looked stark, bare limbs outlined against a gray sky. Eliza spent the colder months focusing on interior work for the caretaker's cottage and brainstorming orchard improvements with Marisol. In December, Dr. Orr's conclusive report arrived of the orchard's 3 seemingly rare strains. 2 were confirmed as genetically unique, likely having derived from experimental grafting methods going back at least a century. The third shared similarities with a known heritage variety, but still held distinct traits. The significance was clear. Riverside Acres was a living repository of potentially precious genetic material. Eliza's mind reeled at the opportunities. She could produce boutique cider using these exclusive apples, partner with local restaurants for farm-to-table experiences, or even license saplings to nurseries. Marisol was equally enthusiastic, noting that the orchard's unique genetics would further bolster their farmland preservation arguments. Stonebridge, however, was not idle. Early in the new year, they held a flashy press conference announcing a major investment in Greystone County's future. They unveiled architectural renderings of a massive complex boasting a golf course, shopping plaza, and luxury homes. The orchard's boundary was conspicuously absent from their glossy map, like a hole in their puzzle. At a subsequent county commission meeting, tensions ran high as Stonebridge pressed for expedited approval of additional rezoning. Farmers, environmental groups, and local citizens voiced concerns, citing everything from loss of open space to potential harm to the aquifer. Eliza, Marisol, and members of the cooperative spoke passionately about sustaining family farms, protecting historical sites, and encouraging sustainable agriculture. Though the commission delayed a final vote, the writing on the wall was clear. Stonebridge had clout money and connections. If the farmland preservation zone didn't pass soon, Stonebridge's developments could box in or overshadow Riverside Acres. Despite the mounting pressure, the orchard moved forward with quiet determination. Hank supervised pruning sessions and soil amendments. While Eliza and her kids prepared for the next growing season, Marisol organized a small marketing push, encouraging local businesses to adopt an apple tree, pledging funds for orchard care in exchange for future produce. The response was moderate but hopeful, with a few local companies signing on to support the orchard's rebirth. One snowy afternoon, as Eliza was cleaning the caretaker's cottage, she discovered a yellowed sheet of paper tucked inside an old dictionary she'd purchased secondhand for the kids' schooling. It contained a quote likely from an unknown author that read, "To plant a tree is to believe in tomorrow." To care for an orchard is to invest in a future beyond your own. The words resonated deeply with her current journey, both literally and metaphorically. She was planting seeds for a tomorrow she hoped to see flourish. Nights were still restless. She'd wake and wonder if she had made a mistake turning down Stonebridge's money. The orchard was a labor of love, but it demanded every ounce of her courage and resourcefulness. Yet every time Mia or Jackson ran outside to help Hank check on the trees, or a neighbor dropped by with kind words about the orchard's comeback, that fear subsided. She remembered Cornelius Rivers' note and how he'd entrusted the orchard to future generations. Letting it fall into Stonebridge's hands would be the real failure. By early spring, as the snow melted and patches of green reemerged, the orchard began to awaken. Buds appeared on pruned branches, and the unique heirloom varieties showed particular vigor. Warm sunshine encouraged the first sprinkling of blossoms, and Eliza felt a tangible shift in the air, a sense that this season might be pivotal. Preparations for a major public open house were in full swing. The Historical Society planned to unveil a small exhibit of the safe's contents alongside Cornelius Rivers' letters and ledgers presented in collaboration with the Harding Rural Revival Trust. Their OR agreed to give a short talk on the unique apple strains. Local restaurants were invited to set up booths featuring apple-based treats and homemade preserves. It was all designed to showcase Riverside Acres as a cornerstone of Greystone County's agricultural heritage. Daniel Price, of course, was not thrilled. Rumors floated that Stonebridge saw the event as a threat, a way for the orchard to win public favor and sway the county commission's upcoming vote on the farmland preservation zone. Eliza tried not to dwell on that drama, throwing herself instead into the final preparations. On the morning of the open house, the sky was a brilliant blue. Hank fired up a refurbished tractor, towing a wagon for rides through the orchard's newly cleared rows. Jackson and Mia helped set up a welcome booth, distributing pamphlets about the orchard's history and the newly discovered apple varieties. Volunteers parked cars in a nearby field, which had been mowed for the occasion. By midday, a crowd of over 200 people roamed the orchard. Families gaped at the blossoming trees. Students took notes for environmental science projects, and retirees reminisced about how Riverside Acres used to be a local treasure. Dr. Orr spoke passionately about orchard biodiversity, while the Historical Society displayed the safe, the ledgers, and a photo of the tarnished pocket watch. Eliza stood near the farmhouse, greeting visitors and answering questions. Many asked how they could support the orchard or help preserve other farms in the area. She directed them to sign a petition urging the county commission to formally adopt the farmland preservation zone. Others simply thanked her for bringing new life to a place they thought was lost. Amid the bustle, a local journalist pulled Eliza aside for a brief interview. "What does today mean for you personally?" she asked. Eliza paused, gazing over at Mia, who was chatting with visitors, and Jackson, who was explaining pruning techniques he'd learned. "It means a chance to save not just a piece of land, but a piece of our collective history," she replied. "It's about planting roots for my children and for future generations, hoping they'll appreciate where our food and heritage come from." Later in the afternoon, Marisol approached wearing a triumphant grin. "We collected close to 500 signatures for the petition, far more than expected," she said. "This should carry weight at the county commission meeting." Eliza breathed a sigh of relief. She felt an unspoken debt to the orchard, to Cornelius Rivers, whose hidden safe had revealed the orchard's deeper meaning. This was no longer just an old farm to be flipped, or merely a livelihood for her family. It was, in essence, a living monument to resilience, reminding everyone that not all progress required erasing the past. As the blossoms gave way to tiny green apples, the momentum around Riverside Acres escalated. The county commission scheduled a decisive hearing for late spring to vote on the farmland preservation zone. Stonebridge, eager to halt any measure that could impede their massive development plans, began an aggressive marketing campaign. Radio ads touted the jobs Stonebridge would bring, the tax revenue, and the modern amenities their projects would offer Greystone County. Online forums lit up with debates between pro-development and pro-preservation residents. Eliza sensed the tension rising within her community. Some people struggling to make ends meet found the promise of Stonebridge's development enticing more jobs, more commerce, and potentially increased property values. Others, especially multi-generation farm families, feared losing the region's agricultural identity. Daniel Price, ever present in local headlines, framed Stonebridge's plan as a balanced approach to growth. Yet those who had seen the orchard's transformation firsthand recognized that balance often meant farmland giving way to lucrative subdivisions. During the final week before the hearing, Marisol spent long hours coordinating with local officials in the cooperative. The farmland preservation proposal had grown to include not just Riverside Acres, but a network of about a dozen small farms. Their combined acreage, historical significance, and agricultural output were presented as worthy of legal protection. Eliza attended strategy sessions where lawyers discussed zoning laws and water rights with an intensity that made her head spin. To ease the stress, Eliza walked the orchard each evening, checking on the baby apples that dappled the trees. Some were no bigger than marbles, while others on the older varieties showed promising size. Hank estimated they'd have a decent harvest come fall. Maybe not a bumper crop, but enough to start forging relationships with local restaurants and cider enthusiasts. The orchard's transformation was evident. Fewer tangled vines, healthier branches, and neat rows that hinted at the orchard's old grandeur. One day, a black SUV pulled up to the caretaker's cottage while Eliza was mixing compost for the garden. Daniel Price stepped out alone, this time dressed in a tailored suit that looked out of place against the rural backdrop. He raised a hand in greeting, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Brooks?" He began, taking a cautious step forward. "I know we've been at odds, but I wanted to speak with you face-to-face off the record. May I?" Eliza wiped her hands on her jeans and motioned for him to continue. She noticed Mia and Jackson peering from a window. Curious yet wary, Price cleared his throat. "Look, Stonebridge has a timeline. We want to break ground on the next phase by summer. The farmland preservation zone is a major obstacle. I'm authorized to make a final offer, one that I believe is more than fair. We'll buy Riverside Acres outright for well above market value. Or if you refuse to sell, we can still arrange a partnership. You'd benefit from the Stonebridge's marketing reach, and your orchard would fit into our development plan as a quaint historical attraction." Eliza felt her jaw tighten. She thought about how far they'd come, how many volunteers had poured their energy into the orchard, how the children had found hope here. "Why do you need our orchard so badly?" she asked Price. Exhaled frustration flickering across his face. "It's strategically located. We can't complete our master plan if we have this agricultural holdout in the center. Also, your orchard's growing fame complicates the narrative we're trying to present to investors. It's that simple." Eliza studied Daniel Price's face, searching for any hint of empathy or flexibility. All she found was a determined businessman, someone who had staked his reputation on acquiring land for large-scale development. She remembered the note from Cornelius Rivers about preserving the orchard for a future beyond one's own horizon. That sentiment clashed irrevocably with Stonebridge's agenda. "I can't accept," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Riverside Acres isn't just a commodity to me. It's part of something bigger. Both historically and for the community's future." Price's features hardened. "You realize that if the farmland zone doesn't pass, Stonebridge will surround you anyway. You'll be an island in a sea of construction. Traffic noise, utility expansions. Eventually you'll want to sell because it won't be feasible to continue as a farm. That's a risk I'm willing to take." Eliza replied, her heart pounding. "And if we do pass the farmland zone, you'll have to adapt your plans. It goes both ways." His jaw clenched. "You're making a mistake. This orchard could bring you quick prosperity if aligned with Stonebridge. Instead, you'll fight an uphill battle for years. Think of your kids." Anger flared at the mention of her children, but Eliza swallowed it down. "I am thinking of them. I'm thinking of the values I want to pass on. Resilience, stewardship, and respect for the land." She let that linger before adding, "And I'm prepared to fight for what's right." Price stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. Without another word, he turned and got into his SUV, slamming the door harder than necessary. A cloud of dust followed as he spun the vehicle around and drove off, leaving Eliza standing alone in the orchard's driveway. Over the next few days, she told Marisol about the encounter. The older woman was not surprised. "Price is running out of tactics," she observed. "He wants to make sure you're aware of how far they can push, but he's overestimating the fear factor. We have enough community support, especially after that open house, that giving up now would betray all those who stood by us." Still, the commission hearing loomed an event that would either cement the orchard's protection or leave it vulnerable. On the morning of the hearing, Eliza dressed in her best outfit and drove with Marisol and Hank to the county courthouse. The line to get inside wrapped around the block. Farmers in worn boots, families with young children, environmental advocates, and Stonebridge supporters, in suits all crammed into the hall. The hearing began with presentations from Stonebridge's attorneys who argued that the farmland preservation proposal was anti-development and detrimental to economic growth. They displayed charts forecasting job losses and tax shortfalls. If the zone passed, Price himself took the podium, maintaining a polite yet pointed tone, stressing the philanthropic green spaces Stonebridge intended to include. Then came the cooperative's turn. Marisol introduced the farmland preservation proposal, detailing how it would protect specific parcels of historical and agricultural importance, while still allowing reasonable growth in less sensitive areas. Dr. Orr spoke passionately about biodiversity, pointing out that once farmland was converted into subdivisions, it was rarely reclaimed. A representative from the Historical Society highlighted the orchard's significance, brandishing photos of the safe's contents and referencing the genealogical importance of the orchard's ledgers. Finally, Eliza stepped up, her heart pounding. She recounted her personal journey, losing at auction, then finding a partnership with Marisol Harding. She spoke of the orchard's transformation and the volunteers who gave their time and energy. She cited her children's newfound sense of purpose, the community's embrace of Riverside Acres, and the living heritage stored in every branch of those old apple trees. In the silence that followed her testimony, Eliza braced herself for questions. One commissioner, an older woman with glasses perched on the edge of her nose, leaned forward. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "I applaud your commitment, but can your orchard and the other small farms really provide the economic benefits? Stonebridge claims they will." Eliza steadied her nerves. "I don't deny that Stonebridge can generate revenue, but do we want to measure everything purely by short-term economic gain? Our county is at a crossroads. We can pursue balanced growth, preserving the unique heritage that attracts tourism and fosters community pride. Or we can let large-scale developments reshape our landscape entirely. Riverside Acres already creates value. Local jobs for orchard workers, educational programs for our schools, historical tourism potential, and possibly unique apple varieties that could put Greystone County on the map for specialty, cider and produce. That might not match Stonebridge's numbers today, but it's sustainable, it's rooted in our identity, and it doesn't vanish if a market crashes." The room burst into scattered applause, quickly hushed by the gavel. The commissioners conferred for what felt like an eternity. Finally, they announced they would issue a decision by the end of the week, needing time to review the evidence. Stonebridge's group dispersed in grim silence. While the orchard's supporters gathered outside, exchanging words of encouragement, Marisol placed a reassuring hand on Eliza's shoulder. "No matter what happens, you did everything you could. The orchard stands on its own merits now." 3 days later, a statement from the county commission arrived. The farmland preservation zone was approved, though with certain limitations. Land already sold to Stonebridge could be developed as planned, but any historically or agriculturally significant properties listed under the cooperative's proposal, including Riverside Acres, would receive protective status. A wave of relief washed over Eliza when she heard the news. She phoned Hank, Dr. Orr, the cooperative members, everyone who had fought alongside them. Marisol arrived at the cottage shortly afterward, brandishing a bottle of non-alcoholic sparkling cider and 2 glasses. They clinked glasses, letting out laughs tinged with months of pent-up tension. "It's not a total victory," Marisol cautioned, "but it's enough to keep Stonebridge from swallowing us whole. They can build around us, but they can't force us out or rezone the orchard for something else." Eliza exhaled, thinking of how close they'd come to losing this place. The orchard's immediate future was secure, and they could continue restoring it without fear of an imminent bulldozer. Summer arrived with vibrant green leaves shading small clusters of apples. Hank predicted a modest but decent harvest, enough to do a limited cider run. The orchard's new status brought increased attention. Small tour groups booked weekend visits. Local chefs wanted to sample the heirloom varieties, and the cooperative's other farms rode the wave of interest. They began hosting weekly farm markets, rotating locations among the members. Riverside Acres often attracted the largest crowds, likely due to the intrigue about the hidden safe orchard. Eliza left her diner job, entirely devoting herself full-time to orchard management and the new responsibilities that came with running a semi-public venue. She learned about pest management, irrigation systems, bookkeeping, and marketing strategies, all in rapid succession. Jackson and Mia thrived in the open space Jackson apprenticed under Hank, learning the finer points of pruning and machinery maintenance, while Mia turned an overgrown corner of the property into a colorful patch of wildflowers and herbs that visitors loved. The orchard's growth wasn't just literal, it was symbolic. Every blossom that set into fruit reminded Eliza of new beginnings, each cluster a testament to the power of commitment and hope. She occasionally recalled Daniel Price's warning that they'd be an island in a sea of development, but she found solace in the orchard's inner world. Within those rows of trees, the chatter of insects, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the scent of fertile earth drowned out the rumble of construction vehicles in the distance. On a sunny afternoon in late summer, the orchard hosted its first apple harvest festival. Music echoed across the fields, children bobbed for apples, and families wandered among the rows picking fruit that had ripened to varying shades of red, yellow, and green. Dr. Orr made an appearance sampling each newly ripened variety. Marveling at their flavors, Eliza watched from a makeshift stage near the farmhouse as Hank demonstrated traditional cider pressing techniques. The press donated by a local historical society squeaked and groaned, with each turn of the handle producing sweet, cloudy juice that visitors lined up to taste. Next to the press stood a display of the orchard's historical finds, replicas of Cornelius Rivers's letters, photos of the safe, and information about the unique apple strains. Midway through the festival, Marisol introduced a surprise guest, a representative from a regional craft cider brand who had come to explore collaboration. "If these varieties are as special as Dr. Orr says," he commented, sipping from a sample cup, "we'd be thrilled to offer a limited edition Riverside Revival cider. It would be a fantastic story, resurrecting nearly lost apples to create a modern product." The idea both exhilarated and intimidated Eliza. A partnership with a recognized brand could greatly expand the orchard's reach, but she also wanted to ensure that the orchard didn't lose its identity in the process. "We'll discuss the terms," Marisol assured, giving Eliza a nod that said they'd handle negotiations carefully. As the afternoon wore on, Eliza found a moment to slip away from the bustling festival. She wandered toward the caretaker's cottage, then continued to a spot beyond it, where a lone bench overlooked a gentle slope leading down to the river. From here, she could see the orchard in a panoramic view. Rows of apple trees dotted with festival goers, enjoying the fruits of months of labor. She sat and closed her eyes, recalling the day of the auction when she thought Riverside Acres had slipped from her grasp forever. In retrospect, losing the auction directly had led her to Marisol, to this improbable partnership that turned out to be exactly what she needed. The crunch of gravel made her look up. Hank strolled over, removing his cap to wipe the sweat from his brow. "Heck of a festival," he said, pride evident in his voice. "Never thought I'd see the orchard like this again." Eliza offered a warm smile. "It's thanks to you, Marisol, Dr. Orr, and so many volunteers. I'm just the one who got stuck holding the orchard keys." Hank chuckled. "You're more than that. You're the heart of this place now. Even old Cornelius would be proud." They stood quietly for a moment, watching a group of children run past each, clutching small paper bags filled with freshly picked apples. The air carried the scent of warm grass, ripe fruit, and distant barbecue smoke from a vendor's stall. In that calm moment, Eliza felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She remembered the note from the wooden box. "If fate leads you to these records, preserve what you can, that your harvest shall endure." She silently promised Cornelius and herself that she would. When autumn arrived in its full splendor, Riverside Acres was awash in gold and red foliage, the orchard's leaves turning brilliant shades before falling to the ground in crunchy drifts. Eliza Jackson and Mia spent their weekends raking leaves into massive piles, occasionally breaking into impromptu leaf fights. Despite the festival's success, orchard work never truly paused. They still had late-season apple varieties to harvest and pressing schedules to maintain. Stonebridge, meanwhile, proceeded with their developments in adjacent parcels, but the farmland preservation status restricted them from encroaching on Riverside Acres. Construction. Noises sometimes filled the air, and lines of new houses sprouted like an invasive species on the horizon. Yet the orchard remained a haven, its boundaries legally safeguarded, its purpose intact. Every so often, rumors surfaced about Stonebridge, wanting to revisit negotiations or offer buyouts to farmland owners. But those affected by the preservation zone seemed resolute. One crisp afternoon, Eliza decided to revisit the farmhouse cellar. Though they'd removed the safe's contents long ago, she felt compelled to sweep out any lingering debris and assess whether the cellar could be repurposed for cider storage. She was joined by Mia, who had become increasingly adventurous around the old farmhouse. Their flashlight beams danced along the stone walls as they headed down. The cellar smelled of damp earth, but now it was free of the clutter that once choked its corners. In the spot where the safe had been discovered, Eliza paused, running her hand along the masonry. She marveled at how a simple lockbox had set so many events in motion, unveiling the orchard's deeper history. "Hey, Mom." Mia asked, her voice echoing softly. Do you think Mr. Rivers ever imagined a little girl like me would be down here someday? Eliza smiled and wrapped an arm around her daughter. He probably hoped that someone would carry on his orchard's legacy. Maybe he didn't picture you specifically, but he knew there would be future generations who cared about what he built. Mia grinned, shining her flashlight around the cellar's corners. It's pretty cool. I mean, not every kid gets to say they live on a farm with a secret, safe, rare apples and a big story. In that moment, Eliza felt the weight of everything they'd fought for the orchard, the community's support, the battles against Stonebridge, and the extraordinary partnership with Marisol. It all solidified the belief that they were walking a path that connected the past and the future in a tangible, meaningful way. When they emerged upstairs, sunlight pierced through dusty windows, illuminating a swirl of tiny dust motes. Mia darted outside to find Jackson, leaving Eliza to linger in the quiet farmhouse. In the empty rooms, she could almost sense the ghosts of families who had once lived there. The pride, the struggles, the routine joys and sorrows. She resolved that once the orchard was in full production and they had the resources, restoring the farmhouse into a functional part of the property would be her next big project. Perhaps a visitor center or a farm stay, B&B, something that honored the orchard's roots and welcomed new guests to share in its story. Late in the season, the orchard's final harvest was smaller than the first flush, but still respectable. Hank deemed it a good sign that many of the older trees survived the year with improved health. They began preparing the orchard for winter, mulching, fertilizing, and giving special attention to the delicate heirloom varieties that Dr. Orr had identified as particularly unique. Financially, the orchard was far from wealthy, but the sales from apples, the limited cider runs, and the public events generated enough revenue to reinvest in further improvements. Marisol still held her stake through the Harding Rural Revival Trust, reassuring Eliza that she wasn't rushing to see a quick return. Sustainability isn't measured in quarters, she liked to say. It's measured in seasons and years and generations. Word of Riverside Acres revival spread through small agricultural circles, attracting the attention of a popular online publication devoted to sustainable farming. They sent a writer to interview Eliza, who spent hours walking through the orchard, explaining the transformation process, the hidden safe discovery, and the fight against Stonebridge. The resulting article went viral within its niche and sparked a flurry of emails from folks across the country eager to visit or learn from the orchard's restoration model. Eliza felt both excitement and trepidation. She couldn't help but notice how many people wanted to replicate the orchard's journey without necessarily acknowledging the immense effort, the emotional toll, and the luck involved. She penned a short piece in response, emphasizing that success required community support and a willingness to take risks without guaranteed outcomes. Meanwhile, Daniel Price seemed quieter. Stonebridge's housing tracts steadily arose along the orchard's perimeter, but there were fewer direct confrontations. Eliza suspected that the farmland preservation zone approval had forced Price to shift tactics. He still had a partial victory in building out much of the county, and perhaps he realized Riverside Acres wouldn't budge. A new normal settled over the region, housing developments on one side, protected farmland on the other. As the days shortened and a chill settled in, Riverside Acres prepared for its first winter under farmland protection. In an echo of the previous year, Eliza sat at her makeshift desk in the caretaker's cottage, reviewing spreadsheets of orchard expenses and projected revenue. But this time she wasn't plagued by the same dread. They had enough to keep going. The orchard was stable, even if it wasn't wildly profitable yet. Importantly, it had a future. One night she found Mia curled up on the living room sofa, flipping through one of Cornelius Rivers' old ledgers. The little girl had become strangely entranced by the spidery handwriting and the archaic references to harvest yields. "Mom," she said, "did you know back then they had to worry about a pest called the railroad worm?" Eliza chuckled, joining Mia on the sofa. "Makes sense. Farming's always been a battle with nature. Even now, we have to stay on top of pests." Mia ran her finger along a line of text. "He wrote about losing half a crop to frost one year, but then the next year was great. It's like, you never know what'll happen, but you keep planning." Eliza pulled Mia in for a hug, her heart swelling. "Exactly. We keep planting because we believe the next year might be better." Winter came in earnest, blanketing Riverside Acres in snow. The orchard trees stood bare, their branches forming skeletal silhouettes against the gray sky. Eliza and Hank took advantage of the dormancy to prune the older sections more aggressively, removing dead wood and shaping younger trees for future growth. Jackson got the hang of driving a small utility tractor, carefully clearing snow from the paths. Mia, for her part, turned the caretaker's cottage into an art studio, sketching orchard landscapes and taping them to the walls. Marisol visited periodically, checking financials and discussing future plans. Within a year or two, we could think about that B&B idea in the farmhouse, she mused one afternoon as they sipped hot cocoa in the cottage. But only if you are ready. You've been juggling a lot. Eliza nodded, aware that her days were already a flurry of orchard tasks, homeschool sessions with Mia, who thrived with a flexible schedule, and community outreach. But the idea of opening the farmhouse to visitors felt like the next logical step. They'd reveal the place's history more intimately, letting guests experience orchard life firsthand. As the coldest months dragged on, Eliza found herself reflecting often on the orchard's improbable survival. Despite Stonebridge's looming presence, the orchard had carved out its place in the county's fabric. People still trickled in, even in winter. Curious to see the legendary orchard that had stood up to a development giant, a few local bed and breakfasts asked about partnering on special winter tours, offering guests a romantic, snowy orchard walk and a cup of warm cider by the cottage's fireplace. It was during one of these quiet tours in mid-January, a handful of visitors wrapped in scarves and boots, led by Eliza through the orchard's hushed lanes, that something unexpected happened. A young couple lagged behind the group, snapping photos and whispering softly. Eliza noticed tears on the woman's cheeks. Concerned, she hung back to check on them. "Is everything okay?" Eliza asked gently. The woman smiled through her tears. "Yes. Sorry, I'm just emotional. My grandmother grew up in Greystone County, and she used to talk about these apple orchards. She passed away last year and never got to bring her here, but being here feels like I'm sharing a piece of history with her." Eliza felt her own eyes mist, taken aback by the depth of meaning Riverside Acres had for strangers. "I'm so glad you could visit," she said softly. "This orchard has its own spirit. I think it brings up a lot of memories and connections for folks." The couple nodded, and the woman brushed snow off a low branch. "It's just beautiful," she said. "Thank you for saving it, Cornelius." "Rivers saved it first," Eliza replied. "He left these records, these varieties of apples, and a sense of possibility. We're just continuing what he started." That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She stared at the softly glowing coals in the cottage fireplace, replaying that conversation. In her darkest moments, she'd question whether she had the energy to keep fighting Stonebridge to manage the orchard's demands to provide for her kids. But encounters like today's reminded her that Riverside Acres transcended her personal struggles. It stood for something broader, a bridge between generations, a testament that the land's worth wasn't measured solely by profit margins. March arrived with the hesitant promise of spring. Patches of grass emerged from melting snow, and the orchard's branches seemed poised to burst into bud at any moment. Hank, ever the faithful mentor, inspected the trees daily, occasionally muttering to himself about the unpredictability of late frosts. Eliza reconnected with Dr. Orr, who was excited to run another round of tests on the orchard's unique varieties once they leafed out. In the caretaker's cottage, Eliza tackled the orchard's finances. Revenue projections looked promising, with local grocery stores and farm markets showing interest in carrying their apples come harvest time. She worked with a branding consultant arranged through Marisol's network to design labels featuring an antique illustration of Riverside Acres, referencing the orchard's storied past and the hidden safe that had ignited so much interest. Word came that Stonebridge was finalizing its first wave of housing developments. They invited the local press to a ribbon-cutting ceremony, touting their success in blending modern living with respect for the county's rural charm. Eliza noted the irony, but refrained from commenting publicly. Instead, she focused on the orchard's second Apple Blossom Festival, a springtime event they'd initiated last year to commemorate new growth and the orchard's resilience. The festival drew even larger crowds this time. Food trucks lined up near the farmhouse, local musicians performed folksy tunes, and craft vendors sold handmade goods. The orchard paths were dotted with pastel blossoms, creating a stunning backdrop for photos. Families posed under trees. Children exclaimed over the blooms, and retired farmers walked in quiet awe, recalling old orchard traditions. Marisol stood next to Eliza near an information booth, both of them taking a rare moment to observe the scene rather than rush around. "It's incredible," Marisol mused, scanning the crowd. "A couple of years ago, this orchard was a foreclosure property, slated for who knows what. Now it's the county's highlight." Eliza nodded, her eyes following Mia and Jackson, who were busy helping with the festival tasks. I still can't believe how much has changed or that we nearly lost it. Sometimes I wonder how things would have gone if someone else had opened that safe. Someone who didn't care about preserving what Cornelius Rivers started. Fate has a sense of humor, Marisol replied with a knowing grin. Or maybe it's just that you were meant to do this, Eliza laughed softly. You sound like Hank. He thinks the orchard was waiting for us. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a county commissioner. The same older woman who had once questioned the orchard's economic viability approached them beaming. I just wanted to say how impressed I am with what you've accomplished. The farmland preservation zone has become a model for other counties. We're looking into expanding it further, given the public support. That's wonderful news, Marisol said. We'd be happy to help or share what we've learned, the commissioner nodded. Keep doing what you're doing. This orchard has become the heart of a new kind of community, one that respects both growth and legacy. Eliza felt a subtle surge of pride after countless hours of hard work, anxiety, and hope. Riverside Acres stood as living proof that development didn't have to come at the expense of history, and that a single mother's dream could align with a philanthropist's mission, forging a path that honored the past while embracing the future. Late that evening, long after the festival's last guest departed, Eliza took a solitary walk through the orchard. The moon illuminated the rows of trees, casting delicate shadows of blossoms on the ground. The air was cool but carried a hint of warmer nights to come. She stopped near a particular tree, an old trunk with twisted limbs, that according to Dr. Orr might be one of the orchard's rare heirloom varieties. Its blossoms glowed faintly in the moonlight. Eliza reached out, gently touching a flower. In that stillness, she thought about everything the orchard represented: survival through harsh winters, rebirth in spring, the slow, patient work of nurturing new life from old roots. In her mind, she heard echoes of the various voices that had shaped her journey. Her grandfather's stories of orchard life planting seeds of curiosity in her childhood. Hank's unwavering devotion teaching her that land responds to care with abundance. Marisol's confident offer rescuing her from near defeat at the auction and opening a door to partnership. Dr. Orr's research revealing the orchard's hidden genetic treasures. Daniel Price's insistent claims that everything had a price. Yet for all the talk of money, property rights, and development, the orchard remains something intangible. An intertwining of past and future, a living organism that demanded respect as much as it offered promise. Returning to the caretaker's cottage, she found the kitchen light still on. Inside, Jackson was finishing a project for school, carefully labeling diagrams of apple tree anatomy. Mia dozed on the sofa, an open sketchbook, resting against her chest, showing half-drawn blossoms and swirling lines. In the corner, the old wooden box from the safe sat on a shelf, now empty, except for the note Cornelius Rivers had left for a future steward. Eliza picked it up, rereading his words. If fate leads you to these records, preserve what you can, that your harvest shall endure. The orchard is more than trees. It's a promise between the living and the land. She ran her fingers over the faded ink, sensing the continuum they were all part of. A promise between the living and the land. Deep. She glanced at her children, thinking of how Jackson was already discussing orchard innovations, maybe a greenhouse for year-round herbs, and Mia wanted to incorporate her love of art into orchard-inspired pieces. These were their new dreams, sprouting in the rich soil, nurtured by a legacy that predated them by more than a century. Soon she would tuck the children into bed, close the cottage door against the nightly chill, and fall asleep with the orchard's quiet presence just outside. Tomorrow would bring more tasks, maybe an early pruning session, a meeting with a local cafe owner about stocking Riverside Acres apples, or a collaboration with neighboring farms. There would be challenges, blights, storms, financial decisions. But after everything they had overcome, those obstacles felt surmountable. Eliza set the wooden box back on the shelf, gratitude swelling in her chest. The orchard had offered a second chance, not only for itself, but for her family. The hidden safe's contents turned out to be more meaningful than gold ever could be. Knowledge, history, and a call to stewardship. As she switched off the kitchen light, she whispered a silent thank you to Cornelius Rivers, to the land, and to the strange twists of fate that had brought her here. Outside, the moonlit orchard stood as testament that some legacies aren't lost. They're simply waiting for the right hands to uncover them, to believe in them, and to help them flourish. With that comforting thought, Eliza Brooks embraced the future. A future in which Riverside Acres would continue to stand for hope, history, and the enduring power of community, season after season, generation after generation. Today, Riverside Acres isn't just another orchard. It's a living monument to resilience, American values, and the fight for what's right. Eliza's fierce determination combined with community spirit and respect for tradition transformed forgotten farmland into a thriving symbol of hope. Where once developers saw only dollar signs, families now walk among blossoming apple trees, sharing memories and creating new ones. This incredible journey proves something we all hold dear. Courage and integrity can triumph against even the toughest odds. Whether you're recalling simpler times or cheering for everyday heroes who refuse to back down, Riverside Acres is proof positive that the American dream is alive and well. Thanks for coming along for the ride. Let us know your thoughts below. Have you seen your community change? Ever fought to protect something you loved? Join the conversation and help us celebrate those who defend our shared American heritage.